Welcome back to another episode of Organic Chemistry. I'm that chemist, and today I'm going to tell you some stories where I failed. And make sure you listen to the end because I'm going to be talking about a bit more selenium chemistry today. So, when you're working in research, there's a lot of things that can go wrong. And so sometimes you're working on a new idea and you can get disappointing results. Now, if you don't deal with disappointing results that well, that's not too good because every single day you're going to have disappointing results in research. In fact, more often than not, stuff will fail. It's just par for the course. And it can be really challenging because you can get really emotionally entangled in your reactions. And I'm one of those people. So you have to get used to stuff failing every day. And if you're starting off research, especially as an undergrad or a new grad student, it can be a little bit intimidating and you can feel like a failure. And, even if things are working, you could be working on stuff that's even better. And so there's a good quote from Emmanuel Lasker, which is, when you see a good move, look for a better one. He was a famous chess player. And so just because you're working on something and it's working well doesn't mean you couldn't be doing something better. And this is the FOMO, the fear of missing out. Life has plenty of things you can do that matter more than the thing you're doing right now, but it's impossible to know what's worth doing. And so sometimes it's appropriate to move on, but sometimes it's appropriate to keep pushing. And this image here kind of illustrates that. You can see this guy on the top is eagerly digging away, and the other guy on the bottom, he just quit right before he hit diamond. Now, this isn't to say you should always push forward, because your time is the most valuable thing you have. You spend money and you spend time. You're not forced to spend money, but you are forced to spend time. So you have to do something with your time, and that thing should matter. And so it can be possible that you're just pursuing a dead end. It can be hard to make the call because what do you know? You're a new grad student, you're a new researcher, you don't necessarily know what's worth doing. And so oftentimes you're going to have to make bad decisions. Now, you can rely on people who know more than you, and you should, but not always. And even if someone seems really confident, like you might say that, oh, that chemist, you seem pretty confident in knowing when to stop and when to start. I don't know necessarily any better than you do. It's always a gamble. And so you can have hope, right? You can work on a project and you can hope that it's going to get better, and this can help, right? Especially if you've done like failed reactions for an entire week in a row. You might think that that's a little bit unrealistic, but it's totally true. However, this can be toxic, right? You can just convince yourself and delude yourself until you believe, your delusions are true, like everything's going to work, just the next one will work, the next one will work. And that's how you drive your boat into the rocks. And so it's important to have the discretion between doing things that matter and what doesn't matter. And so it's a burden and a gift because if you're honest with yourself, you'll know when you're making mistakes. However, that's a good thing because then you can trust yourself. And so one thing you can do to help tune and, I guess, get your discretion at a better level is to consult people who know more than you. So, such as your supervisor, your peers, they might know better. People in the Discord might know better, but you shouldn't just blindly follow their advice because you're trying to develop your own brain as a researcher, and that's really important. And so, whenever it's possible, rationalize why you feel the way you do. Are you just having a rough day? Are you just upset that things aren't working well? Or is it genuinely the case that you should stop this project and you know you're wasting time? And it's important to know that you can trust your judgment. If you can articulate why it's worth continuing, you can better criticize your justification. So if you build a wall, you can try and create a tactic to take down that wall, but you need to be able to articulate. So if you just have a gut feeling that this chemistry is that useful, or if you're just defeatist, you don't think it really matters, but you don't know, then you can't really have a valid argument against what you want to do. Now, it's probably just you're in a bad mood, you didn't get enough sleep, you're a grad student, you've been working too long. But that being said, there can be times where you should stop a project, even if your supervisor says it's worth continuing. Now, that doesn't mean you should always fight your supervisor either. So you shouldn't give your intuition blind trust. Criticize everything. Make sure things are as bulletproof as possible. And this is just basically saying, like, you need to be able to be your own worst critic. You need to be able to be prepared for whatever anyone says because you're going to have to justify why your research is worth doing when you're applying for funding, when you're presenting at conferences. You have to be able to sell your material as good as possible. Now, that being said, you shouldn't lie. You shouldn't like oversell your stuff either. You should be honest, but put your best foot forward, right? And so if you do this well, your intuition can be tuned to be fairly reliable, and you can trust when your projects are worth continuing and when they're not. A healthy gut instinct is fairly reliable. It's like your sixth sense. And I've found in my experience that predicting organic chemistry type reactions can be done even if you haven't seen a reaction before, if you've just developed a healthy enough organic intuition. But for that intuition to be accurate, you need to keep it in check and you need to criticize it when it's wrong. And you need to always be open to criticism. And so I would say, in general, as a researcher, it's worth being open to criticism because it's going to happen from every scientist ever. People are going to try and take you down a peg. They're going to try and make sure that you're bulletproof. And so you need to be ready for that. And that's one of the hardest things early on for people becoming scientists. So the first problem, or the first case where I had this type of thing occur, was in my attempted synthesis of difluoroethers from orthoesters. And so in the deoxyfluor video, which I'll put a card to here, I had been synthesizing difluorobenzyl methyl ether. Additionally, I've talked about briefly making some difluoroethers in this transesterification video, which I'll put a link to here. And in both cases, I was trying to make the same types of products. So I had another idea for how to make them that I'll tell you about in a minute. But I'd been working on this different project where I had a target-oriented synthesis, and I was using the Johnson-Claisen orthoester rearrangement, which is a type of sigmatropic rearrangement. And so here what happens is you start with an allylic alcohol, and using an orthoester, you end up getting an alpha-beta, or not an alpha-beta, sorry, a very distal alkene. It's not alpha-beta, it's not beta-gamma, it's gamma-delta. So here you can see an ester is the product, and we have a carbon-carbon bond-forming reaction. So if you haven't seen paracyclic reactions before, they can be a little bit confusing at first. And so the way that this reaction happens is first, this orthoester can be protonated by an acid. Usually acetic acid is a strong enough acid. Sometimes slightly stronger acids will be used. This can then get converted to an oxocarbenium through the elimination of ethanol. This oxocarbenium can undergo nucleophilic attack by the allylic alcohol, forming this protonated orthoester species. It's then possible to have a proton transfer from the allylic alcohol group to one of the ethyl groups. Once this ethyl group has been protonated, it's possible to eliminate that as ethanol through the loss of H+ via the solvent or just spontaneous, elimination of H+. And then you can see we have this system which looks like a six-membered ring. And what happens is we cleave a carbon-oxygen single bond and we form a carbon-carbon single bond. And we have migration of these two double bonds, forming an ester and this gamma-delta unsaturated ester. And so this is a really useful carbon-carbon bond-forming reaction. Now, one of the things I was looking at was this oxocarbenium intermediate, and I was wondering if it would be possible to trap that using fluoride. And so the transformation that I wanted to accomplish was the following. I wanted to treat this with HF and convert two of those alkoxy groups into a difluoro group. And so this was an idea I had. There wasn't any literature precedent at the time, and so I thought it would be worth trying. And so essentially the idea here is that first, through the protonation, you'd lose an alkoxy group as an alcohol, and then fluoride could come in and make this monofluoroorthoester, and through this iterating one more time, you'd be able to make a difluoroether. And so was it possible? Sort of. So in most cases, in 3 of the 4 examples that I tried in my undergrad thesis, I wasn't able to get any conversion at all. I did get the solutions turning yellow because, of course, yellow always happens. But in one case, I did get a little bit of the difluoroether, only a couple percent, and I was never able to optimize it higher than that. In my case, if I didn't use dichloromethane, I wouldn't get any of the difluoroether product as detected by GCMS or 19F NMR. However, when I did use DCM or chloroform, I was able to get a couple percent conversion, but never more than that. It's also worth noting that this difluoroether product is relatively unstable. It tends to hydrolyze in glass, but in my case, the majority of the orthoester was not reacting. It's probably because fluoride is just a poor nucleophile, and we're probably accessing a rather unstable oxocarbenium intermediate, given the reaction conditions. And so, while this wasn't able to work, there was one beautiful thing that happened. And so you can see this beautiful, gorgeous pink color. Now, this is another case of failure, because even though you can see this dark, dark pink color that looks kind of like cream soda, I was never able to figure out what this was. I tried isolating it, I tried doing UV vis, I tried doing NMR, I even tried doing NMR in a PTFE liner so that I could get an NMR, and I was never able to confirm what this was. I even tried slowly evaporating this down, and the amount of residue that remained was a fraction of a milligram, and it took months and months. So even though I got this beautiful pink color from this reaction, I was never able to figure out what it was. Presumably, you could imagine that it's some sort of oxonium that forms. Interestingly, though, this didn't happen with the other orthoesters. It only happened with trimethyl orthobenzoate. So clinging on to failed projects can be really toxic. In my case, it was an undergraduate thesis project, so I was able to move on without any issue. But for a grad project, it can be really challenging, especially once you've already sunk so much time into it. The other issue is the sunk cost fallacy, which is you've already sunk so much time into it that you might as well sink in more. But this is a fallacy because something's not working or something's not worth doing. Putting more effort into it's just a waste of time. It's like a money pit, which is like what a boat is commonly referred to as. And so it's important to eagerly embrace new problems. You can do anything, but you can't do everything. Additionally, you have to publish at some point. So even though you might want to always move on to better problems worth solving, you have to publish because that's how you get funding and that's how you can finish your PhD. So it's important to like not focus too much on some projects, but sooner or later you do need to focus on something and finish it off. And so this is kind of like the problem of research is you have to be comfortable criticizing stuff. You have to be comfortable and willing to change, but you can't be changing all the time. It's a little bit of a struggle. So the next example that I have is when I was trying to make seleno no esters. And so you might say, that chemist, why don't you call them seleno esters? Well, the problem is seleno is like selenium, just like thio is for sulfur derivatives. So instead of a thioester, we would have a thionoester, and so instead of a selenoester, we have a selenonoester. And that might upset you, and I'm okay with that. So you might recall from one of my previous videos that Lawson's reagent is able to convert esters into thionoesters. It's also known that Woolen's reagent can convert amides into selenoamides. However, there hadn't been any report of Woolen's reagent converting esters into selenonoesters. And so I wondered, would it be possible to convert an ester to a selenonoester? You can see that they have similar structures between Woolen's reagent and Lawson's reagent. And so when I tried this, no. However, it was possible for me to convert thionoesters into selenonoesters. However, this is only in very low yield. I was just never able to even isolate these products, but I was able to confirm their conversion using mass spec. And depending on what the R group here was, if I had a benzene ring, I would typically get 1 to 2%. But if I moved to a heterocycle such as a thiophene or a furan, I was able to get this into the 4 to 6% range. And I only tried this on methyl thionoester derivatives. So even though this is slightly promising, you can imagine that it would be possible to develop new analogs of Woolen's reagent that would allow this transformation to work. And if you think that selenonoesters are actually worth pursuing, I would encourage you to pick this up as a potential project. Now, my opinion, based on what I'm aware of, is I think this would be the type of paper that would be in JOC or TETLET, so we just kind of left this. And so even though this was a promising hit, and it was an exciting moment for me because I had the idea to use a thionoester with Woolen's reagent and I got a successful result, it still doesn't mean that it's a project worth pursuing. And so you can have a success, but even that success can still be a failure. And so this is one of the things you kind of need to learn to get used to in chemistry and research and life in general, which is, you can have something good, but you need to find something better. And so hopefully this is an interesting lecture about failure and how to deal with it. If you have any questions or comments, please leave them below. And it would really help out the channel if you were able to support us on Patreon. Have a great day.